The winter wind howled across the snow-covered plains like a wounded animal, its bitter cry piercing through the silence of the New Mexico territory. Prudence Evans clutched her thin woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, her knuckles white with cold and fear as the wagon jostled violently beneath her. This wasn't how her journey west was supposed to end, bound for a marriage she never agreed to, sold by her own uncle to settle a gambling debt. It was 1878, and the promise of a new life in Deeming had turned into a nightmare. The three men escorting her uncle's associates, had revealed their true intentions as soon as they'd crossed into the territory. Not Deeming, but a mining camp where a man named Blackwell awaited his purchased bride. Prudence, 22 and alone in the world since her parents' passing, had spent the last 2 days plotting her escape. The wagon hit another rut in the frozen road, and she saw her chance. The men were distracted, arguing about which trail to take as the late afternoon sun sank toward the horizon. The temperature was dropping by the minute. Soon it would be too dark to see, too dark to chase her. Heart hammering against her ribs, Prudence inched toward the back of the wagon. The ground below was crusted with ice and snow, the wagon moving fast enough that jumping would be dangerous, perhaps fatal. But staying meant a fate worse than broken bones. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and launched herself from the moving wagon. The world tilted as she fell, the frozen ground rushing toward her. But instead of the bone-shattering impact she expected, strong arms caught her mid-air, breaking her fall. The force of her jump sent both her and her unexpected savior tumbling into a snowbank. Prudence gasped as she found herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a weathered, handsome face partially hidden beneath a worn cowboy hat. "Are you trying to get yourself killed, madam?" His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as not being from these parts originally. Before she could answer, shouts erupted from the wagon ahead as the men noticed her absence. The cowboy's head snapped up, his expression darkening as he took in the situation in an instant. "Come with me," he said, helping her to her feet and pulling her toward his horse, a magnificent buckskin standing patiently nearby. "Those men don't look like the type to let you go willingly." "They're taking me to be married against my will," Prudence explained breathlessly as he helped her onto his horse. "My uncle explanations later," the cowboy interrupted, swinging up behind her. "Right now, we need to disappear." As the angry shouts grew closer, he spurred his horse into motion. One strong arm wrapped securely around her waist as they galloped away from the road and into the shelter of a pine forest that bordered the trail. Prudence didn't know who this man was or where he was taking her. But as the wagon and her captors faded into the distance, one thing was certain: she just exchanged one uncertain fate for another. But somehow, with the solid warmth of the stranger at her back and the powerful horse beneath them, she felt safer than she had in months. The cowboy guided his horse deeper into the forest, following what appeared to be a game trail. Snow-laden branches scraped against them as they rode, the light fading rapidly as the sun dipped below the mountains. "I'm Morgan Xavier," the cowboy said, his breath warm against her ear as they slowed to navigate a particularly dense stretch of trees. "Most folks call me Morg." "Prudence Evans," she replied, her voice shaking from cold and lingering fear. "Thank you for catching me." His chuckle rumbled against her back. "It's not every day a woman falls from the sky into my arms, Miss Evans, though I reckon jumping from moving wagons isn't the safest way to travel." "It seemed preferable to where that wagon was taking me," she said, trying to stop her teeth from chattering. Morgan urged his horse over a small ridge, and suddenly they were in a protected clearing where a small cabin stood, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A lean-to shelter housed another horse, a dappled gray mare who nickered at their approach. "My winter trapping cabin," Morgan explained, dismounting and reaching up to help her down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and his strong hands steadied her. "Not fancy, but it's warm and those men won't find us here." Inside, the cabin was indeed warm, with a fire burning low in the hearth. It was a single room with a bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, and shelves stocked with provisions. Simple, but clean and orderly. Morgan busied himself building up the fire while Prudence stood awkwardly near the door, suddenly aware of her situation alone in a remote cabin with a stranger. As if sensing her unease, Morgan spoke without turning from the fire. "You can have the bed, Miss Evans. I'll sleep by the fire. Come morning, I'll take you to Deeming if that's still where you're headed." "Why are you helping me?" Prudence asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since he caught her. Morgan straightened and turned to face her, his expression solemn in the firelight. "My sister ran from a forced marriage 5 years ago. Nobody helped her." A shadow passed over his face. "She didn't survive the winter." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. "I'm sorry," Prudence whispered. Morgan nodded once, then moved to a trunk near the bed. He pulled out a thick woolen blanket and handed it to her. "You should get warm. I'll make some coffee and heat up some stew." As Prudence wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, she studied her rescuer more carefully. Morgan Xavier was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to handling himself in difficult situations. Despite her precarious circumstances, she couldn't help but feel she'd been fortunate in her rescuer. While Morgan prepared their meal, Prudence told him her story, how after her parents died of influenza in St. Louis, her uncle had taken her in only to gamble away what little inheritance she had. When there was nothing left to bet with, he'd offered her as payment to a mining investor named Silas Blackwell. "I've heard of Blackwell," Morgan said grimly, setting a steaming bowl of venison stew before her. "Runs the Silver Strike mine north of Deeming. Has a reputation for cruelty, especially to women." Prudence shivered despite the fire's warmth. "When I refused the arrangement, my uncle had his friends escort me by force. They said once I was Blackwell's wife, I'd have no choice but to accept my situation." Morgan's jaw tightened. "Your uncle and Blackwell clearly don't know much about the law or decent behavior." He sat across from her, his own bowl untouched. "What will you do now?" The question caught her off guard. In her desperation to escape, Prudence hadn't thought beyond getting away from the wagon. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have a little money sewn into my dress, not much, but maybe enough to get farther west. I heard there are opportunities for women to teach in California." "You're educated, then." "My father was a professor. He insisted I learn everything he taught his male students." A small smile touched her lips at the memory. "My mother thought it scandalous, but he was determined I would never be dependent on a man's charity." "Yet here you are," Morgan observed, not unkindly. "Yes," Prudence said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Here I am, but I jumped, Mr. Xavier. I may need help now, but I won't be anyone's property." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "No, Miss Evans, I don't believe you will." He finally took a spoonful of his stew. "Eat. We can figure out the rest tomorrow." They ate in companionable silence, the fire crackling and the wind howling outside the cabin's sturdy walls. After the meal, exhaustion hit Prudence like a physical blow. Morgan showed her to the bed, again assuring her he would sleep by the fire. Too tired to argue, Prudence removed only her boots before crawling under the heavy quilt. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Morgan Xavier sitting by the fire, his profile etched in gold and shadow, a guardian between her and the dangers of the night. Morning came with weak sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. Prudence woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. The events of the previous day came rushing back as she spotted Morgan at the stove, cooking something that smelled like flapjacks. "Good morning," he said when he noticed she was awake. "Thought you might sleep till noon. You must have been exhausted." Prudence sat up, embarrassed by her rumpled appearance. "I can't remember the last time I slept so soundly." "Safety will do that," Morgan replied, sliding a plate of flapjacks onto the table. "Coffee's hot if you want some." Over breakfast, Morgan explained that they were about 15 miles from Deeming. "We can reach town by midday if we leave soon, but those men might still be looking for you." "Do you think they'd follow us to Deeming?" Prudence asked, concern creasing her brow. "Depends on how much they stand to lose if they don't deliver you to Blackwell." Morgan's expression was grim. "Men like that don't give up easily when money's involved." "Then perhaps Deeming isn't safe for me." Morgan studied her thoughtfully. "I have a friend there, Martha Wilcox. She runs a dress shop and takes in seamstresses. She might be willing to help, give you work and a place to stay until you sort things out." Hope flickered in Prudence's chest. That would be extraordinary. But why would she help a stranger? Martha's not one to turn away someone in need, especially another woman. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Besides, she owes me a favor or two. I've brought her enough pelts over the years to stock a fur warehouse." As they prepared to leave, Prudence watched Morgan move around the cabin with efficient grace, packing provisions and checking his rifle. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steady calm that made her feel protected despite having known him less than a day. "Are you a trapper, then?" she asked as he helped her onto his horse, having insisted his buckskin was better suited to carrying both of them through the snow. "Among other things," Morgan replied, swinging up behind her. "I trap in winter, work as a ranch hand in summer, guide hunting parties in fall. Whatever keeps me moving. You don't stay in one place long." His arms encircled her as he took the reins, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Never found a reason to settle down. The ride to Deeming was tense with vigilance. Morgan kept them off the main trails, following paths only someone intimately familiar with the territory would know. They stopped once to rest the horse and eat a cold lunch of jerky and hard biscuits. "Tell me about your family," Morgan said as they sat on a fallen log, the winter sun providing little warmth despite its brightness. Prudence glanced at him, surprised by the personal question after hours of silence. "There's not much to tell. My father taught history at a small college. My mother was the daughter of a banker, a good match by society's standards. They were happy, I think, in their way. And they taught you to be independent." It wasn't a question, but Prudence nodded anyway. "My father believed education was the greatest gift he could give me. My mother taught me to survive in society." A sad smile touched her lips. "I'm not sure either of them prepared me for jumping from wagons in the New Mexico territory." Morgan's laugh was unexpected, a rich sound that transformed his serious face. "I doubt many parents do, Miss Evans." "Prudence, please," she said impulsively. "After saving my life, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." His blue eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Prudence," he said, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue. "It suits you." They continued their journey, the landscape gradually shifting as they approached Deeming. The snow thinned, revealing patches of dormant grass and bare earth. By the time the town came into view, a collection of wooden buildings, straddling the newly built Southern Pacific Railroad line, the afternoon was half gone. Morgan guided his horse to a modest building on the edge of town with a sign that read, Wilcox Dry Goods and Dressmaking. He dismounted and helped Prudence down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Wait here," he said, tethering his horse. "Let me speak to Martha first." Prudence nodded, suddenly nervous. Her future hung on the goodwill of a woman she'd never met. Morgan returned moments later with a plump, gray-haired woman whose keen eyes assessed Prudence from head to toe. "So this is your damsel in distress, Morgan Xavier," Martha Wilcox said, her voice warm with amusement. "You always did have a talent for finding trouble." "Martha," Morgan said with a hint of warning in his tone. The older woman waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't get prickly. Miss Evans, I hear you need a safe place to stay and possibly work." "Yes, madam," Prudence replied, straightening her spine. "I can sew well and I learn quickly." Martha's shrewd gaze softened. "Any woman brave enough to jump from a moving wagon rather than be forced into marriage has the kind of spirit I admire. Come inside, dear. We'll get you settled." Prudence turned to Morgan, suddenly reluctant to part from the man who had rescued her. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," he said, his expression unreadable. "Martha will take good care of you. Will I see you again?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Something flickered in Morgan's eyes. "I'll be around for a few days. Need to sell some furs and stock up on supplies." He touched the brim of his hat. "Rest well, Prudence." As she watched him lead his horse toward the livery stable, Prudence felt a strange emptiness in her chest. She told herself it was merely the aftermath of her ordeal, not the departure of a virtual stranger who had held her life in his hands for one tumultuous day. Martha's shop turned out to be a bustling establishment that served not only as a dressmaker's, but also as a general store for fabric, notions, and the sundry items women in the territory needed. The back portion contained a small living area where Martha resided alone, her husband having passed away 3 years prior. "He built this place for me," Martha explained as she showed Prudence to a small but comfortable room off the kitchen. "Said every woman deserved a space that was truly her own." She patted Prudence's arm. "You'll sleep here. It's not much, but it's private." "It's perfect," Prudence said sincerely, overwhelmed by the woman's kindness. "I can't tell you how grateful I am." "Save your gratitude until you've seen how much work I'll have you doing," Martha said with a wink. "Now, let's find you some clean clothes and a hot bath. You look like you've been dragged through half the territory." Later that evening, clean and dressed in a borrowed nightgown, Prudence sat at Martha's kitchen table with a cup of tea, recounting her story in more detail. "So this uncle of yours essentially sold you to Silas Blackwell," Martha said, her mouth set in a grim line. "That explains why Morgan was so determined to help you. He has a particular hatred for men who treat women as property." "He mentioned his sister," Prudence said carefully. Martha nodded, her expression somber. "Catherine, lovely girl. Their parents arranged a marriage for her to a man old enough to be her father, a cattle baron from Texas. She ran away in the dead of winter, got caught in a blizzard." She sighed heavily. "Morgan found her too late. He's never forgiven himself, though there was nothing he could have done." "How terrible," Prudence murmured, her heart aching for the pain Morgan must carry. "It changed him," Martha continued. "He was on his way to becoming a settled man before that, had land staked out, was building a ranch house. Afterward, he sold everything and took to wandering. Said he couldn't bear to stay in one place with those memories." She studied Prudence over the rim of her teacup. "Until today, I'd never seen him bring anyone to town before." Prudence felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He was simply being kind." "Morgan Xavier is many things: honorable, stubborn, occasionally reckless, but he's never simply anything," Martha replied with a knowing smile. "Now, get some rest. Tomorrow we'll see what kind of seamstress you really are." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. True to her word, Martha kept Prudence busy learning the operations of the shop, assisting customers, and working on sewing projects. To Prudence's relief, she proved skilled enough with a needle that Martha declared her a natural and began teaching her more complex techniques. There had been no sign of the men who had tried to take her to Blackwell, though Martha had discreetly asked her regular customers to keep an eye out for strangers asking about a young woman matching Prudence's description. There had also been no sign of Morgan Xavier, and Prudence tried to ignore the disappointment that settled in her chest each time the shop bell rang and it wasn't him. On her fourth day in Deeming, Prudence was alone in the shop, Martha having gone to deliver a completed dress to a customer, when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up with her practiced shopkeeper's smile, only to freeze when she recognized one of the men from the wagon, the youngest of the three, with a scar cutting through his right eyebrow. He recognized her immediately, his surprise quickly turning to a predatory grin. "Well, well, if it isn't the runaway bride." He turned and called through the open door. "Lyle, I found her." Prudence backed away as a second man older, with a grizzled beard and cold eyes, entered the shop. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she glanced frantically around for a weapon, anything to defend herself. "You've caused us a lot of trouble, girl," the older man Lyle growled. "Blackwell's mighty disappointed. We're going to have to make up for lost time." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Prudence said, her voice steadier than she felt. She backed toward the counter where Martha kept a small pistol for emergencies. "You ain't got a choice," the younger man said, advancing toward her. "Your uncle signed papers. You belong to Blackwell now." "No woman belongs to any man," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Prudence's knees nearly buckled with relief as Morgan stepped into the shop, his expression thunderous. He'd clearly come straight from the trail, his clothes dusty, his face stubbled with several days' growth of beard, but he'd never looked more welcome to Prudence's eyes. "This ain't your business, Cowboy," Lyle said, turning to face the new threat. "The girl's spoken for." "The lady seems to disagree," Morgan replied, his hand hovering near his holster. "And I'm making it my business." The atmosphere in the shop crackled with tension. Prudence could see the calculation in Lyle's eyes as he assessed Morgan, the way he stood, the confidence in his stance, the dangerous calm in his blue eyes. "You're outnumbered," the younger man said, though he seemed less certain than before. Morgan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Am I?" As if on cue, the shop door opened again, and a tall, silver-haired man wearing a sheriff's badge entered, hand resting on his gun. "Everything all right in here, Xavier?" the sheriff asked, though his eyes were fixed on Lyle and his companion. "Just explaining to these gentlemen that forced marriage isn't legal in the New Mexico territory, Sheriff Donovan," Morgan replied evenly. "Or anywhere else in the United States." Lyle's face darkened with anger. "We got papers. No paper makes a woman property," the sheriff interrupted. "Now, I suggest you boys head back to wherever you came from and tell this Blackwell fellow that his business methods aren't welcome in Deeming." For a tense moment, Prudence thought they might refuse. Then Lyle spat on the floor and jerked his head at his companion. "This ain't over," he muttered as they pushed past Morgan and the sheriff. When they were gone, Prudence's legs finally gave way and she sank onto a nearby chair. Morgan was at her side instantly, kneeling before her, his eyes searching her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Without thinking, she reached out and gripped his hand, needing the anchor of his touch. "Thank you for coming when you did," she finally managed. Morgan's expression softened. "I was on my way to check on you anyway," He glanced up at the sheriff. "Thanks for backing me up, Donovan." The older man nodded. "Always happy to run trash out of my town." He tipped his hat to Prudence. "Madam, I'll keep an eye out for those two, make sure they leave Deeming." After the sheriff left, Morgan remained kneeling before Prudence, their hands still joined. "I should have been here sooner," he said, self-recrimination evident in his voice. "I went to check if the trail was clear, make sure Blackwell's men weren't watching the town." "You couldn't have known they'd find me so quickly," Prudence assured him, though her heart was still racing from the encounter. The shop bell jangled again as Martha hurried in, her face flushed with exertion. "Sheriff Donovan just told me what happened," she said breathlessly. "Are you all right, dear?" "I'm fine, thanks to Morgan," Prudence replied, suddenly aware she was still clutching his hand. She released it reluctantly, and he rose to his feet. Martha looked between them, a knowing gleam in her eye. "Well, it seems you've made quite an impression on our wandering trapper, Miss Evans. He's usually halfway to the mountains by now." Morgan cleared his throat, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable. "I was concerned for Miss Evans's safety, clearly with good reason." "Indeed," Martha said, her tone dry. "And now that you've confirmed the danger is real, what do you propose we do about it?" Morgan's jaw set in a determined line. "Those men will be back, possibly with reinforcements. Blackwell isn't the type to give up easily, especially not after being publicly defied." "Then I should leave," Prudence said quietly. "I won't put either of you in danger because of my troubles." "Nonsense," Martha said firmly. "You're not going anywhere alone." "She's right," Morgan agreed. "But staying here isn't safe either. Blackwell has influence in this region. Money buys loyalty, and not everyone is as honest as Sheriff Donovan." Prudence looked between them, confusion evident on her face. "Then what am I to do?" Morgan took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for something momentous. "I have a proposition, Prudence. It's unconventional, but it might be the only way to ensure your safety." Martha's eyebrows shot up. "Morgan Xavier, if you're about to propose what I think you are—" "Not exactly," Morgan interrupted, his eyes never leaving Prudence's face. "I own land near Silver City, about 60 miles northwest of here. It's remote, well protected, and Blackwell has no influence there. I'm offering you sanctuary, at least until we can be sure Blackwell has moved on to other investments." Prudence blinked, trying to process his offer. "You want me to go with you to your land? Alone?" A faint flush colored Morgan's cheeks. "Martha would come as chaperone, of course." "I wouldn't ask you to compromise your reputation." "Oh, you wouldn't, would you?" Martha said with an exaggerated sigh. "And here I was looking forward to a quiet winter." "You always complain that winters in Deeming are dull," Morgan countered. "Besides, the cabin is comfortable, and you've said yourself that business slows to a crawl once the snow sets in." Prudence looked between them, her mind racing. "I can't ask either of you to uproot your lives for me." "You're not asking, I'm offering," Morgan said softly. "And it wouldn't be permanent. Just until spring, when travel is easier and you can decide where you want to go next." "The man makes a rare good point," Martha admitted. "I could use a change of scenery, and Mabel Jenkins has been pestering me to let her run the shop for years. This would give her a chance to prove herself." Prudence felt overwhelmed by their generosity. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Morgan replied, his blue eyes intent on hers. "Let me help you, please." Something in his expression, a vulnerability beneath the strength, made her decision for her. "Yes," she said softly. "Thank you." The next morning dawned clear and cold as they prepared to leave Deeming. Martha had worked with remarkable efficiency to arrange for her assistant Mabel to take over the shop, pack necessary supplies, and spread word that she was visiting a sick relative in Silver City, a plausible story that would explain her absence without raising suspicion. Prudence, now outfitted in practical traveling clothes courtesy of Martha's shop, felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation as Morgan loaded their belongings onto a wagon he'd purchased specifically for the journey. Her meager possessions, the dress she'd arrived in, and the few items Martha had insisted on giving her fit into a single carpet bag. "Ready?" Morgan asked as he helped her onto the wagon seat. His hand was warm against hers, solid and reassuring. "As I'll ever be," Prudence replied with a small smile. Martha climbed up beside her, arranging her skirts with a huff. "I'd forgotten how uncomfortable wagon seats are. My poor backside will be bruised for weeks." Morgan's lips twitched with suppressed amusement as he took his place on Prudence's other side and picked up the reins. "It's not too late to change your mind, Martha. And miss seeing you play house in that wilderness cabin of yours." "Not for all the comfort in the world," the older woman retorted. As they rolled out of town, Prudence cast a last glance at deeming the place that had briefly been her sanctuary. She hadn't expected to leave so soon, or in such circumstances, but there was an undeniable thrill in the unknown path before her. Especially with Morgan Xavier by her side. The journey to Silver City would take several days, particularly with the wagon slowing their progress. Morgan explained that they would follow back trails rather than the main road, again to avoid potential encounters with Blackwell's men. "The land was my father's," Morgan explained as they traveled, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves punctuating his words. "He came west after the war, staked a claim, built a life from nothing. When he died, it passed to me." "Yet you choose not to live there permanently," Prudence observed. A shadow passed over Morgan's face. "After Catherine, I couldn't bear the emptiness. The cabin reminds me too much of what might have been." Martha reached across Prudence to pat Morgan's arm. "Your sister would want you to find peace, boy, not spend your life wandering like some restless ghost." Morgan's smile was tinged with sadness. "Perhaps, but peace has been hard to come by." They camped that night in a sheltered draw, the wagon providing some protection from the wind. Morgan built a fire and prepared a simple meal while Martha set up bedrolls, one for Morgan some distance from the wagon, and two for herself and Prudence within it. As they ate around the fire, Prudence found herself studying Morgan's face in the flickering light. There was a quiet strength to him, a reliability that made her feel secure despite their precarious situation. But there was also pain etched in the lines around his eyes, a grief he carried like a physical weight. "Tell me about Catherine," she said softly. Morgan's head jerked up, surprise evident in his expression. For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then his shoulders relaxed. "She was 4 years younger than me, smart as a whip and twice as stubborn." A genuine smile touched his lips at the memory. "Our mother died when Kat was just 12, so she became the woman of the house. Learned to cook, clean, manage a household far too young, but she never complained." "She sounds remarkable," Prudence said. "She was," Morgan agreed. "When our father arranged her marriage, I should have fought harder against it, but I was young, still believed in respecting my father's wishes." His expression hardened. "By the time I realized how unhappy she was, how cruel the man was, it was too late. She'd already run." Martha made a soft sound of sympathy. "You mustn't blame yourself, Morgan. Catherine made her choice, as we all do." "I should have protected her," Morgan said, his voice rough. "That's what brothers are supposed to do." "Is that why you helped me?" Prudence asked gently. "Because you couldn't help her." Morgan's eyes met hers across the fire, startlingly blue even in the dim light. "Maybe at first," he admitted. "But now—" He trailed off, looking away. "It's getting late. We should rest if we want to make good progress tomorrow." Prudence wanted to press. to ask what he'd been about to say, but she respected his reticence. Whatever was growing between them, this tentative connection was still too fragile to push. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern: travel by day, camp by night. As they moved farther from Deeming and deeper into the mountains, the temperature dropped further and the snow deepened. Morgan proved to be an adept guide, finding paths through seemingly impassable terrain, always with an eye for their comfort and safety. On the 3rd night, as they huddled close to the fire, Martha announced she was turning in early, giving Prudence a meaningful glance before retreating to the wagon. The obvious matchmaking might have been embarrassing if Prudence hadn't been secretly grateful for the opportunity to speak with Morgan alone. "Your land must be very remote," she observed as Morgan stoked the fire. "We haven't seen another soul for days." "That's part of why I chose it," he replied. "After a life of wandering, I wanted somewhere truly isolated for when I need solitude." "Don't you get lonely?" Morgan considered her question seriously. "Solitude and loneliness aren't the same thing." "I felt more lonely in crowded saloons than I ever have under an open sky." "I understand that," Prudence said, surprising herself with the admission. "Even in my uncle's house, surrounded by his friends and associates, I felt invisible, like no one truly saw me." Morgan's gaze was penetrating in the firelight. "I see you, Prudence Evans." The simple statement sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "What do you see?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A woman of extraordinary courage," he said without hesitation. "Someone who would rather risk death than surrender her freedom, who faces an uncertain future with grace and determination." His voice softened. "Someone worth knowing." Prudence felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire's warmth. "You give me too much credit." "I was terrified when I jumped from that wagon." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Morgan said. "It's acting despite it." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. Prudence found herself studying Morgan's hands as he fed small branches into the flame's strong, capable hands that had caught her, saved her from certain injury or worse. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured. Morgan nodded, his expression open. "Why haven't you settled down?" "Found a wife, started a family. Surely there must have been opportunities." A faint smile touched his lips. "Are you asking if there's been a woman in my life, Prudence?" She flushed but held his gaze. "Perhaps I am." "There have been women," he admitted. "But none that made me want to stop wandering." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "After Catherine died, I swore I'd never put anyone I cared about in a position where they felt trapped. Marriage, too, often becomes a cage, especially for women." "It doesn't have to be," Prudence said softly. "My parents had a true partnership. My father valued my mother's opinions, her intelligence. They made decisions together." "Then your father was a rare man," Morgan replied, "and you were fortunate to have such an example." "Yes," Prudence agreed, thinking of her parents with a familiar pang of grief. "I was." Morgan studied her face in the firelight. "What about you? No suitors in St. Louis?" Prudence laughed softly. "A few. None that saw me as anything more than a professor's daughter with unusual ideas about a woman's place in the world." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "My father's colleagues thought my education was a charming eccentricity until I dared voice opinions in their presence. Then it became an embarrassment." "Their loss," Morgan said simply. Prudence felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words. This man, this near stranger who had saved her life and now risked his own to protect her, saw her more clearly than anyone had in years. "We should get some rest," Morgan said eventually, though he seemed reluctant to end their conversation. "Tomorrow we'll reach the cabin. as Prudence climbed into the wagon and settled beside a softly snoring Martha. She found herself anticipating their arrival with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, a sense that whatever awaited her at Morgan Xavier's remote cabin would change the course of her life irrevocably. The following afternoon, as the weak winter sun began its early descent toward the horizon, Morgan guided the wagon down a winding trail into a sheltered valley. Prudence gasped as the view opened before them, a pristine landscape of snow-covered meadows surrounded by pine-clad mountains, with a sturdy log cabin nestled against the backdrop of a sheer cliff. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "It's home," Morgan said simply, though there was a note of pride in his voice as he added, "My father built the main cabin. I added the workshop and expanded the stable." As they drew closer, Prudence could see that the cabin was actually a substantial structure larger than she had imagined, with a stone chimney, several windows, and a wide covered porch. Smoke already curled from the chimney, and a figure stood on the porch, waving in greeting. "Vicent," Morgan explained, noting her confusion. "My father's friend. He looks after the place when I'm gone, makes sure everything's in order for when I return." Martha stirred beside her, having dozed off during the final leg of their journey. "Oh my," she exclaimed, taking in their surroundings. "This is rather more civilized than you led me to believe, Morgan Xavier." Morgan's lips twitched with amusement. "I never claimed to live like a savage, Martha." Vicent proved to be an elderly Mexican man with a weathered face and bright, intelligent eyes. He greeted Morgan with a warm embrace before turning a curious but welcoming gaze on Prudence and Martha. "Las mujeres más hermosas han llegado a nuestra montaña," he said with a grin, bowing slightly to them. "He says the most beautiful women have come to our mountain," Morgan translated, a faint flush coloring his cheeks. "Vicent exaggerates." "I think not," Vicent replied in accented but perfectly clear English, winking at Prudence. "It is good to see the cabin with life again. Too long it has stood empty but for old men and ghosts." Morgan introduced them properly, explaining their situation in broad terms. Vicent nodded sagely, as if the arrival of a woman fleeing a forced marriage was an everyday occurrence. "Senor Blackwell's reputation is known even in these remote parts," he said gravely. "You are wise to hide from such a man, señorita. And you," he turned to Morgan with a sly smile, "are fortunate to have found a reason to stay in one place for a while." Inside, the cabin was warm and welcoming, far more comfortable than Prudence had anticipated. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace, a solid wooden table with chairs, and comfortable-looking furniture arranged to take advantage of the fire's warmth. 2 doors led off from the main room, presumably to bedrooms. "Vicent has prepared everything," Morgan said, setting down their bags. "There's fresh bedding, the pantry is stocked, and he's kept the fire going since I sent word we were coming." "You sent word?" Prudence asked, surprised. Morgan nodded. "I dispatched a rider from our first camp. Didn't want to arrive to a cold cabin." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. Every step of the way, Morgan had considered their comfort and safety, anticipating needs before they arose. Vicent departed after ensuring they had everything they needed, returning to his own smaller cabin a quarter-mile down the valley. Martha immediately set about exploring their new temporary home, exclaiming over the well-equipped kitchen area and the surprisingly modern amenities. "Indoor plumbing," she called from behind one of the doors. "Morgan Xavier, you've been holding out on us. This is positively luxurious for the wilderness." Morgan smiled at Prudence, a hint of bashfulness in his expression. "My father believed in comfort even in remote places." He designed a system that brings water from the hot spring behind the cabin. "It's wonderful," Prudence said sincerely. "I never expected." She trailed off, not quite sure how to express her surprise at the level of civilization in this supposedly isolated outpost. "That a wandering trapper would have a proper home," Morgan finished for her, his tone light but his eyes watching her carefully. "Something like that," she admitted. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Xavier." "I hope pleasant ones," he replied softly. Their gazes held for a moment longer than necessary, until Martha bustled back into the room, breaking the spell. "Well, this bedroom is perfect for Prudence and me," she announced. "Plenty of space for both of us. Morgan, you'll take the other room, I assume." Morgan nodded, seeming both relieved and disappointed by the practical arrangements. "Of course. I'll bring in the rest of our supplies while you two get settled." As he stepped outside, Martha gave Prudence a knowing look. "That man hasn't taken his eyes off you since we left Deeming." "Don't be ridiculous," Prudence protested, though she couldn't help the pleased flutter in her stomach at the observation. "I'm old, dear, not blind," Martha replied with a snort. "And I've known Morgan Xavier for 15 years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Prudence busied herself unpacking her meager belongings to hide her flushed cheeks. "We've only just met. He's being kind, that's all." "Morgan is always kind," Martha agreed. "But he doesn't bring strays home to his sanctuary. This place," she gestured around them, "is his refuge from the world. The fact that he's brought you here speaks volumes." Before Prudence could formulate a response, Morgan returned with the last of their supplies. The conversation turned to practical matters, arrangements for sleeping, plans for meals, and discussion of how they would pass the winter months in their isolation. That evening, after a simple but satisfying dinner cooked by Martha, they sat around the fire. The domesticity of the scene struck Prudence forcefully. How natural it felt to be here in this cabin with these people, as if they'd been doing this for years rather than hours. "I've been thinking," Martha said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Prudence needs legal protection from her uncle and this Blackwell character, a way to invalidate whatever agreement they made." Morgan frowned thoughtfully. "I could ride to Silver City, consult with a lawyer. There must be some legal remedy, especially given the coercive nature of the arrangement." "That could take weeks," Martha pointed out, "and it would leave us alone here while you're gone." "There's another solution," Morgan said slowly, his eyes fixed on the fire rather than meeting Prudence's gaze. "One that would immediately nullify any claim Blackwell thinks he has." Prudence felt her heart begin to race as she realized what he was suggesting. "Marriage," she said quietly. Morgan nodded, still not looking at her. "If you were already married, any contract your uncle made would be void. No court would uphold it." "A marriage of convenience," Martha mused, looking between them speculatively. "It's not unheard of, especially in these parts." "It would be temporary, of course," Morgan added quickly. "Once the danger has passed, we could seek an annulment. You would be free to pursue whatever future you choose." Prudence felt strangely disappointed by his emphasis on the temporary nature of the arrangement, though she knew it was the sensible approach. Wouldn't that be committing the same offense we're objecting to, forcing a marriage for pragmatic reasons? Now Morgan did look at her, his blue eyes intense in the firelight. "The difference is choice, Prudence. I'm offering you an option, not imposing a demand. The decision is entirely yours. And if I refuse, then we find another way," he said simply. "I'll still protect you, still help you reach whatever destination you choose when spring comes. This is merely one possible solution, not an ultimatum." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Unlike her uncle or Blackwell, Morgan truly was giving her a choice with no pressure or manipulation. "I'll need time to think about it," Prudence said finally. Morgan nodded. Of course, there's no rush. But as she lay awake that night, listening to Martha's soft snores in the bed beside hers, Prudence knew there was a certain urgency to the decision. Every day they remained in this limbo was another day Blackwell might find them. Another day her future remained uncertain. And yet, marriage, even one of convenience, was not a step to be taken lightly, especially when her feelings for Morgan Xavier were becoming increasingly complex and confusing. The next morning, Prudence woke to find Morgan already gone, a note on the table explaining he'd ridden to check the perimeter of the property and would return by midday. Martha was humming in the kitchen area, preparing a breakfast that filled the cabin with tantalizing aromas. "Sleep well?" the older woman asked as Prudence emerged from the bedroom. "Well enough," Prudence replied, though in truth she'd tossed and turned most of the night, her mind churning with Morgan's proposal and its implications. Martha gave her a shrewd look. "Thinking about our Cowboy's offer, were you?" Prudence sighed, seeing no point in denying it. "It's a practical solution to a difficult problem. But marriage should be more than a practical solution," Prudence said, voicing the thought that had kept her awake. "My parents taught me that." Martha set a plate of eggs and biscuits before her. "True enough, but practical beginnings sometimes lead to the most enduring matches." She sat across from Prudence, her expression serious. "My Harold and I married because his farm needed a woman's touch, and my father had 8 daughters he couldn't afford to feed. Love came later, but it came strong and lasted 30 years. Prudence picked at her food thoughtfully. "What if it doesn't? Come later, I mean." "Then you part ways as you planned, with gratitude for the protection offered and accepted," Martha said practically. "But I wouldn't worry too much about that." "Why not?" Martha's smile was knowing. "Because I've seen how that man looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. And how you look at him." Prudence felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone with eyes in her head," Martha replied with a chuckle. "Now eat your breakfast. Whatever you decide, you'll need your strength." Morgan returned as promised, bringing with him a freshly killed deer for their larder. Prudence watched from the porch as he expertly dressed the carcass in the workshop, his movements efficient and practiced. There was something deeply appealing about his self-sufficiency, his ability to provide and protect. When he finished and came in to wash up, their eyes met across the room, and Prudence felt a now familiar flutter in her stomach. There was something different in his gaze today, a question, perhaps, or an expectation. "I've made my decision," she said quietly. Morgan stilled, water dripping from his freshly washed hands. "And I accept your proposal," Prudence said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "A temporary marriage seems the most practical solution to our situation." Something flickered in Morgan's eyes, relief, certainly, but also something that might have been disappointment at her emphasis on the practical, temporary nature of the arrangement. "You're sure?" he asked. "I meant what I said about finding another way if this doesn't feel right to you." "I'm sure," Prudence confirmed, "but I have conditions." A hint of a smile touched Morgan's lips. "I would expect nothing less. First, we must be absolutely clear about the temporary nature of this arrangement. When the danger has passed, we will seek an annulment as discussed." She took a deep breath. "Second, until that time, this will be a marriage in name only. I won't. That is, we won't." "I understand," Morgan said gently, saving her from having to articulate the delicate point. "I would never presume otherwise." Prudence nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Third, when spring comes and it's safe to travel, you will help me reach California as originally planned. I still intend to seek a teaching position there." This time, the flash of disappointment in Morgan's eyes was unmistakable, though he quickly masked it. "Of course. I gave you my word and I'll honor it." "Then we are agreed," Prudence said, extending her hand formally. Morgan took it, his much larger hand engulfing hers. Instead of shaking it as she expected, he raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Agreed," he murmured, his eyes never leaving hers. The simple gesture sent a tremor through Prudence that she hoped wasn't visible. This marriage might be one of convenience, but her reaction to Morgan Xavier was anything but practical. Martha, who had been watching their exchange with barely concealed interest, clapped her hands together. "Well, that's settled. Now we just need to find someone to perform the ceremony." "Vicent's brother is a justice of the peace in Silver City," Morgan said. "I can ride there tomorrow, bring him back the following day." "That's perfect," Martha declared. "I'll use the time to help Prudence prepare." Every bride deserves something special for her wedding day, even if the circumstances are unusual. Prudence wanted to protest that such preparations were unnecessary for a marriage of convenience, but the genuine enthusiasm in Martha's voice stopped her. Perhaps a touch of normalcy, of celebration, was exactly what they all needed. The next day, Morgan set out for Silver City at dawn, leaving Prudence and Martha alone in the cabin. The older woman wasted no time putting Prudence to work on a simple but elegant dress fashioned from fabric they'd brought from the shop. "It's not the silk and lace you might have had in St. Louis," Martha said as they worked, "but it will be lovely nonetheless." "It's more than I ever expected," Prudence replied honestly. In truth, even before her parents' deaths and her reduced circumstances, she had never been one to dream of elaborate weddings. The idea of marrying for love, for partnership, had always been more important to her than the trappings of the ceremony. "Tell me something, dear," Martha said, looking up from her stitching. "If these unfortunate events hadn't occurred, if you hadn't been forced to flee your uncle and Blackwell, what would you have wanted for your life?" Prudence considered the question carefully. "I wanted to teach," she said finally, "to share my father's love of learning with others. Perhaps to write scholarly articles like he did, though I know few publications accept submissions from women. No thoughts of marriage and family, eventually, perhaps," Prudence admitted, "but only if I found someone who valued me for my mind as well as other attributes. Someone who would see me as a partner, not a possession." Martha nodded approvingly. "A worthy aspiration, and rare enough even in these supposedly modern times." "What about you?" Prudence asked, curious about the forthright woman who had become something of a mentor in their short acquaintance. "Did you always want the life you've built in Deeming?" Martha laughed, the sound rich with memories. "Lord, no. I wanted to be an opera singer, if you can believe it. Had a decent voice as a girl, dreamed of stages in New York and San Francisco." She shook her head ruefully. "But life had other plans. I met Harold, fell in love despite my best intentions, and found myself a farmer's wife in Kansas." "You regret it?" "Not for a moment," Martha said firmly. "Harold gave me a good life, loved me fiercely, and supported my every endeavor. When he died and I decided to move west and open my shop, I did it with the confidence he'd helped me build." Her eyes crinkled with her smile. "Different dreams aren't always lesser ones, my dear." Prudence pondered this wisdom as they continued working on the dress. Was it possible that this detour in her carefully plotted life path, this unexpected marriage to a man she barely knew, might lead to dreams she hadn't yet envisioned for herself? The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. Morgan returned late the following day with Vicent's brother, Judge Emmanuel Ortega, a dignified man with silver-streaked black hair and kind eyes. After hearing their situation, he agreed to perform the ceremony the next morning. "It is not so unusual, what you do," he told Prudence as they sat around the dinner table that evening. "In these territories, Marriages of protection and convenience have a long tradition. Many begin as practical arrangements and grow into something more. And many don't, Prudence pointed out, though she couldn't help glancing at Morgan as she spoke. The judge shrugged philosophically. This is true, but is it not better to enter such an arrangement honestly with eyes open than to make false promises of eternal love that may not endure? It was a perspective Prudence hadn't considered, that there might be a certain integrity in their pragmatic approach, a honesty that some passionate love matches might lack. That night, her last as an unmarried woman, Prudence stood on the cabin's porch, wrapped in a heavy shawl against the cold. The sky above was a riot of stars, more than she had ever seen in St. Louis, their brilliance taking her breath away. She heard the door open behind her but didn't turn, recognizing Morgan's tread. He came to stand beside her at the porch railing, close but not touching, his presence warm and solid in the frigid night air. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly. Prudence shook her head. "No, just contemplating the strange turns life takes. 6 months ago, I was planning university lectures with my father. Now I'm about to marry a man I met when I jumped from a moving wagon." Morgan's soft chuckle warmed her more than the shawl. "Life has a way of appending our careful plans. Indeed it does." She turned to look at him, his profile strong and handsome in the starlight. "Are you having second thoughts, Morgan? This arrangement places obligations on you that you never sought." "None," he said firmly. "I made you a promise the day I caught you, Prudence, to keep you safe. This is merely the fulfillment of that promise." Prudence studied him, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. "Is that all it is to you? A fulfilled promise?" Morgan turned to face her fully, his blue eyes serious in the dim light. "You know it's not," he said softly. "But I also know you value your independence, your freedom to choose your own path. I won't pressure you for more than you freely offer." The sincerity in his voice made Prudence's throat tight with emotion. This man, this honorable, considerate man, was offering her protection without demands, security without subjugation. In a world where men like her uncle and Silas Blackwell saw women as property to be traded, Morgan Xavier stood apart. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching out impulsively to touch his hand. "For everything." Morgan's fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. "Get some rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be a significant day, regardless of the circumstances." As Prudence lay in bed that night, listening to Martha's soft snores, she wondered what her parents would think of her impending marriage. Her practical mother might approve of the protection it offered. Her idealistic father might question a union not founded on mutual intellectual admiration and love. But as she drifted toward sleep, Prudence realized that perhaps the seeds of both were already present in her feelings for Morgan Xavier. Protection, yes, but also a growing respect for his mind, his principles, his quiet strength. And something else, something warm and fluttering that quickened her pulse whenever their eyes met, something that felt dangerously close to the beginnings of love. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the sun casting a golden glow over the snow-covered valley. Prudence stood by the window of the bedroom she shared with Martha, watching as Morgan and Judge Ortega cleared a small area on the porch, sweeping away snow and arranging a simple arch of pine boughs. "He's making it beautiful for you," Martha observed, coming to stand beside her. "For a man who claims this is purely practical, he's taking remarkable care with the details." Prudence felt a warm glow in her chest at the observation. Perhaps he simply believes in doing things properly. "Perhaps," Martha agreed with a knowing smile. "Now let's get you ready." A bride should look her best, even if the groom is pretending not to notice. The dress they had created was simple but elegant pale blue cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, the skirt falling in clean lines to just above her ankles. Martha had insisted on fashioning a small wreath of evergreen and dried berries for her hair, and had produced from her own bag a pair of pearl earrings that had been her mother's. "Something borrowed," she said as she helped Prudence fasten them. "For luck." When they emerged from the bedroom, Morgan was waiting in the main room, dressed in what was clearly his best shirt and waistcoat, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. The look of stunned appreciation in his eyes when he saw Prudence made her cheeks warm with pleasure. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Prudence replied, suddenly shy despite the pragmatic nature of their arrangement. "You look very handsome yourself." Wagon had arrived to serve as witness alongside Martha, and he gave Prudence a gallant bow. "The most beautiful bride our mountain has ever seen," he declared. The ceremony itself was brief, but dignified. Judge Ortega spoke eloquently about the responsibilities of marriage, the mutual support, respect, and companionship that formed its foundation. As Prudence repeated her vows, promising to honor and cherish Morgan Xavier as her husband, she was struck by how natural the words felt on her lips, how little like a deception this marriage seemed in the moment. When Morgan spoke his vows in return, his voice was steady and sincere, his blue eyes never leaving hers. The simple gold band he placed on her finger, his mother's, he had explained the night before, felt strange and yet somehow right. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Ortega concluded with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Xavier." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Morgan's face, their first acknowledgement of the day's strange circumstances. They hadn't discussed this particular aspect of the ceremony, and Prudence could see him wondering if she would welcome such a public display given the private nature of their arrangement. Making the decision for both of them, Prudence rose on tiptoe and pressed a gentle kiss to his lips, brief, but unmistakably real. Morgan's surprise lasted only a moment before he returned the pressure, his hand coming up to rest lightly at her waist. It was over in seconds, but Prudence felt the impact of that simple contact throughout her body, a warmth that had nothing to do with the winter sun and everything to do with the man who was now, in the eyes of the law, her husband. Wagon let out a cheer, and Martha wiped a suspiciously damp eye. Judge Ortega beamed as he presented them with a marriage certificate, duly signed and witnessed. "It is official," he declared. "Mrs. Xavier, may I offer my congratulations and best wishes for your future happiness." Prudence startled slightly at the new name, Mrs. Xavier. It would take some getting used to, this new identity that offered both protection and an unexpected sense of belonging. Martha had prepared a special meal to celebrate the occasion, and they spent the afternoon in the pleasant company of their small party. Judge Ortega shared stories of other unusual weddings he had performed across the territory. Wagon sang traditional songs in his rich baritone, and even Morgan seemed to relax, the habitual wariness in his eyes softening as the hours passed. As evening approached, Wagon and the judge prepared to depart. They would stay the night at Wagon's cabin before the judge returned to Silver City the following day. "Remember what I said," Judge Ortega told Prudence privately as he took his leave. "Many such marriages grow into something true and lasting. The foundation is already there: respect, consideration, mutual purpose." "And if it doesn't?" Prudence asked, voicing the doubt that still lingered despite the day's unexpected warmth. The judge shrugged. "Then you have still been true to yourselves and to each other. There is honor in that, Mrs. Xavier." After their guests departed, An awkward silence fell over the cabin. The practical reality of their new situation, married in law but still virtual strangers, suddenly seemed stark and uncomfortable. "I'll sleep in the workshop," Morgan said, breaking the silence. "There's a cot there that's comfortable enough." Prudence frowned. "That's unnecessary. You should take your own room. Martha and I will continue to share the other." Morgan shook his head. "As your husband, even in name only, I won't have people thinking I've relegated you to shared quarters while I enjoy privacy. Appearances matter, Prudence. If word reached Blackwell that our marriage is less than conventional, it might undermine the protection it's meant to provide." His logic was sound, if somewhat disappointing. Prudence had become accustomed to Martha's comforting presence at night, and the thought of sleeping alone in a strange place, even one as secure as this cabin, was unsettling. "If you're sure," she said finally. "But I don't like the thought of you sleeping in the workshop. It must be cold out there." Morgan's expression softened. "I've slept in far worse conditions. Don't worry about me." Martha, who had been listening to their exchange with poorly concealed interest, rolled her eyes. "You're both being ridiculous. Morgan, sleep in your own room. Prudence can have mine. I'll take the spare bedding and sleep here by the fire. These old bones could use the extra warmth anyway." Neither of them could find a reasonable argument against this sensible arrangement, and so it was settled. That night, Prudence lay in Martha's bed, surrounded by the older woman's familiar scent, listening to the sounds of the cabin settling around her. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling around the eaves and rattling the shutters. Despite the solid walls and the warmth of the fire that still burned in the main room, Prudence felt a shiver of apprehension. Not fear of her new husband. Morgan had proven himself trustworthy beyond question, but fear of her own growing feelings for him. This marriage was supposed to be temporary, a practical solution to an immediate problem. But with each passing day, each small kindness, each shared glance and conversation, it was becoming something else entirely, at least for her. The question that kept her awake long into the night was whether Morgan might be experiencing the same transformation. The first week of their married life settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. During the days, Morgan tended to the necessary work around the property, chopping wood, checking trap lines, hunting when needed, while Prudence and Martha kept the cabin in order and prepared meals. In the evenings, they would gather around the fire, sometimes reading aloud from the surprisingly well-stocked bookshelf, sometimes simply talking. Prudence discovered that Morgan was far more educated than his chosen lifestyle might suggest. He discussed literature with knowledge and insight, debated political developments with nuance, and displayed a keen interest in scientific advancements. When she commented on this one evening, he smiled ruefully. "My father believed in education," he explained. "Insisted I attend university back east before returning to help with the ranch. Said a man needed to exercise his mind as much as his body." "A wise man," Prudence observed. "My father said something similar, though many of his colleagues thought it wasted on a daughter." "Their loss," Morgan said, echoing his words from days earlier. "An inquisitive mind is a gift, regardless of whether it belongs to a man or a woman." Such conversations only deepened Prudence's growing admiration for her nominal husband. Each day revealed new facets of his character: his patience in teaching her to shoot a rifle for protection, his unexpected skill at sketching landscapes in a small notebook he carried, his gentle way with the horses in the stable. 2 weeks after the wedding, a snowstorm descended upon the valley, confining them to the cabin for 3 days. The forced proximity might have been uncomfortable, but instead, Prudence found herself treasuring the extended time together. Martha taught them both intricate card games from her youth, Morgan shared stories of his travels across the Western Territories, and Prudence recounted her father's historical lectures, often prompting spirited debates that lasted well into the night. On the third evening of the storm, Martha retired early, complaining of a stiff back from too much sitting. Left alone by the fire, Prudence and Morgan fell into a comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the flames and the howling wind outside. "Are you happy here, Prudence?" Morgan asked suddenly, his voice quiet but intent. Surprised by the question, she considered it carefully. "Happier than I expected to be," she admitted. "This isn't the life I planned, but I find myself content." Morgan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And when spring comes, do you still intend to continue to California?" The question held weight beyond its simple words. Prudence felt it the unspoken possibility that she might choose a different path, that this temporary arrangement might become something more permanent. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "A month ago I was certain of what I wanted. Now—" She trailed off, not quite ready to articulate the confusion in her heart. "Now," Morgan prompted gently. Prudence met his gaze, finding warmth and something like hope in his blue eyes. "Now I find myself considering possibilities I hadn't anticipated." Morgan reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. "I want you to know that whatever you decide when the time comes, I'll respect your choice. If you wish to continue to California, I'll help you get there safely. If you wish to explore other options, that door is open as well." The carefully chosen words, the deliberate avoidance of any direct declaration that might pressure her. It was so characteristic of Morgan's consideration for her autonomy that Prudence felt her heart swell with emotion. "Thank you," she said softly, turning her hand to intertwine her fingers with his, "for giving me time, for making this place feel safe in every way." Morgan's smile was tender in the firelight. "It's been a different place with you here, a better one." They sat that way for some time, hands joined, watching the fire burn down to embers. When they finally said good night, Prudence felt something had shifted between them, a tentative step toward acknowledging that their marriage of convenience had the potential to become something far more meaningful. The next morning, they woke to find the storm had passed, leaving the valley transformed into a glistening wonderland of pristine snow. Morgan announced he needed to check his trap lines and ensure the storm hadn't damaged any of the outbuildings. "May I come with you?" Prudence asked impulsively. After 3 days confined indoors, the prospect of fresh air and exercise was appealing, even in the bitter cold. Morgan looked surprised but pleased by the request. "It will be hard going in the deep snow," he warned. "I'm stronger than I look," Prudence assured him. "And I'd like to see more of your land." Morgan agreed, helping her bundle up in layers of warm clothing, including a pair of his own woolen socks over hers and a fur-lined hat that came down over her ears. As they set out, Prudence was struck by the absolute silence of the snow-covered landscape, a pristine quiet broken only by the crunch of their boots and their visible breaths in the frigid air. "It's breathtaking," she said as they paused at the crest of a small hill, looking out over the valley spread below them, untouched save for the track of a deer or elk that had passed in the night. "It is," Morgan agreed, though when she glanced at him, she found him looking at her rather than the view. The day became an unexpected adventure. Morgan showed her how to identify animal tracks in the snow, pointed out landmarks on his property, and explained how his trap lines worked. When they reached a frozen stream, he demonstrated how to test the ice for safety, then taught her to slide across its surface, holding her steady when she would have fallen. Prudence couldn't remember when she had last laughed so freely or felt so alive. The physical exertion brought color to her cheeks and a lightness to her spirit that had been missing since her parents' deaths. On their return journey, Morgan led her to a small hill overlooking the cabin. From this vantage point, the entire homestead was visible: the main cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, the workshop and stable, Vicent's smaller cabin in the distance, and the surrounding meadows and forests that made up the Xavier property. "My father stood here with my mother when he first brought her to this land," Morgan said, his voice soft with memory. "He told me once that the look on her face when she saw their new home was the moment he knew they would be happy here, despite the hardships." Prudence studied the scene below, trying to imagine it through the eyes of Morgan's mother, a young bride coming to a remote wilderness with the man she had chosen to marry. Had she been afraid, excited? Both. She must have been a remarkable woman, Prudence observed. Morgan smiled, pride and old grief mingling in his expression. "She was. Educated like you. She taught school back east before meeting my father. After they married and came west, she taught Catherine and me, and later the children from neighboring homesteads." He glanced at Prudence. "She would have liked you." The comparison sent a warm glow through Prudence despite the biting cold. "I would have liked to meet her. She had a saying," Morgan continued, his breath creating clouds in the frigid air. "Home isn't a place, it's people. Find the right people and you'll be home wherever you are." He turned to face Prudence fully. "I never understood what she meant until recently." The implication was clear, and Prudence felt her heart skip a beat. Morgan, whatever she might have said, was cut off by a distant shout. They both turned to see Vicent emerging from the tree line near his cabin, waving frantically to get their attention. "Something's wrong," Morgan said, instantly alert. "We need to get back." They hurried down the hill as quickly as the snow would allow, Morgan's protective instincts evident in the way he kept a steadying hand at Prudence's elbow, ensuring she didn't fall in their haste. Vicent met them halfway, his weathered face grave. "Riders," he said without preamble. 3 men asking questions at the Mendoza place down the valley. "Looking for a young woman traveling with an older lady and a tall cowboy." Morgan's expression hardened. "Blackwell's men." "How did they find us?" Prudence asked, fear clutching at her heart. "We were so careful." "Money talks," Morgan replied grimly. "And Blackwell has plenty of it. They probably bribed or threatened their way along our trail until they narrowed down the search area." "What do we do?" Prudence asked, hating the tremor in her voice but unable to suppress it entirely. Morgan's arm came around her shoulders, solid and reassuring. "We stick to the plan. You're my wife now, legally married with documentation to prove it. Blackwell has no claim on you, regardless of whatever paper your uncle signed. And if they don't accept that," Morgan's jaw tightened, "then they'll find that I protect what's mine." The possessive declaration should have alarmed her. It was exactly the kind of sentiment she had feared in the arrangement with Blackwell. But coming from Morgan, in this context, it felt like a shield rather than a cage. He wasn't claiming ownership of her. He was pledging to defend her right to self-determination against those who would take it away. "Did the Mendozas tell them where to find us?" Morgan asked Vicent. The older man shook his head. "Elena Mendoza is no fool. She told them she had seen no such party, and when they pressed, her husband appeared with his shotgun and suggested they continue their journey elsewhere." A grim smile touched Vicent's lips. "But they were headed this way when they left. They will find the turn to our valley eventually." "How much time do we have?" Vicent considered. "The snow will slow them. Perhaps 2 hours, no more." Morgan nodded decisively. "Vicent, ride to Silver City. Find Judge Ortega and Sheriff Taylor. Tell them armed men are trespassing on my property and threatening my wife. We'll hold them off until help arrives." As Vicent hurried away to saddle his horse, Morgan turned to Prudence. "I need you to go back to the cabin, tell Martha what's happening. Then I want both of you to take my rifle and lock yourselves in the bedroom. Don't come out no matter what you hear." "I won't hide while you face them alone," Prudence protested. "You taught me to shoot, remember?" "Prudence, no," she interrupted, a surge of fierce protectiveness overriding her fear. "You've risked everything to keep me safe. I won't repay that by hiding while you put yourself in danger for my sake." Morgan studied her face, clearly torn between his desire to protect her and his respect for her autonomy. "These men are dangerous," he said finally. "They won't hesitate to hurt you if they get the chance." "Then we'll make sure they don't get the chance," Prudence replied with more confidence than she felt. "Together." Something like pride flickered in Morgan's eyes. "Together," he agreed. "But you follow my lead, and if I tell you to run, you run. Promise me." Prudence nodded. "I promise." The next hour passed in a blur of tense preparation. They returned to the cabin, explained the situation to Martha, who immediately began gathering supplies they might need if forced to flee, and positioned themselves to defend the property. Morgan placed Prudence at an upstairs window with a clear view of the approach to the cabin, showing her how to brace the rifle for better accuracy. He would meet the intruders on the porch, presenting a first line of defense. "Remember," he told her as they took their positions, "these men have no legal right to be here or to make any claim on you. We're simply defending our home against trespassers. Our home." The words sent an unexpected thrill through Prudence despite the danger. This place that had been a temporary refuge was becoming something more in her heart, a home, with Morgan at its center. The sound of approaching horses broke the tense silence. Prudence peered through the window to see 3 riders emerging from the tree-lined Lyle and his younger companion from the shop in Deeming, accompanied by a third man she didn't recognize. Morgan stepped onto the porch as they approached, his stance relaxed but alert, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. "That's far enough," he called when they were still some distance from the cabin. "You're trespassing on private property." The men reined in their horses, and Lyle spurred his mount forward a few steps. "We ain't here to make trouble, Xavier. Just come for what belongs to our employer." "Nothing here belongs to your employer," Morgan replied, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "And no one here is going anywhere with you." "The girl," Lyle insisted. "Prudence Evans. Blackwell paid good money for her, has the papers to prove it." "Her name is Prudence Xavier now," Morgan said, an unmistakable note of pride in his voice. "My wife, legally married with witnesses and documentation filed in Silver City. Whatever arrangement her uncle made with Blackwell is null and void." Lyle's companion, the younger man with the scarred eyebrow, laughed harshly. "Convenient timing on that marriage. Blackwell thinks it's a fraud, just a trick to keep what's rightfully his." "My wife isn't property to be owned," Morgan said, his voice hardening. "And our marriage is as real as it gets. Now I suggest you turn around and leave my land before things get unpleasant." The third man, who had remained silent until now, nudged his horse forward. "Mr. Blackwell authorized us to offer you compensation for your inconvenience," he said, his tone smoother than his companion's. $500, a generous sum for a brief marriage to a woman you barely know." From her vantage point at the window, Prudence felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. They were trying to buy her, to treat her marriage to Morgan as just another transaction. The familiar sense of being reduced to property, to a commodity to be traded between men, brought a surge of anger that overrode her fear. Before Morgan could respond, she called out from the window, making all 4 men look up in surprise. "I am not for sale. Not to Blackwell, not to anyone." I made my choice when I jumped from that wagon, and I choose to remain here as Morgan Xavier's wife." Morgan's eyes met hers briefly, a flash of emotion in them that made her heart race despite the danger. "You heard the lady," he said, returning his attention to the three men. "Now get off my property." The third man's affable demeanor disappeared. Blackwell doesn't take no for an answer, ever. His hand moved toward his gun. "The woman comes with us, willing or not." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As the man drew his weapon, Morgan's hand flashed to his own revolver with lightning speed. Two shots rang out almost simultaneously, the intruders going wide as Morgan's found its mark, striking the man's shoulder and knocking him from his horse. Lyle and the younger man immediately reached for their own weapons, but froze as the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked echoed from the window where Prudence stood. The barrel aimed steadily at Lyle's chest. "Next one who moves gets a bullet," she called, her voice remarkably steady considering the trembling in her limbs. A tense standoff ensued, broken only when the distant sound of galloping horses reached them, multiple riders approaching fast. Vicent had returned, and he wasn't alone. "That'll be the sheriff from Silver City," Morgan said calmly, "along with several deputies if I know Sheriff Taylor. You boys want to be here when they arrive, or would you prefer to leave now and avoid charges of trespassing, attempted kidnapping, and assault?" Lyle's face contorted with fury, but even he could see the situation was lost. With a vicious curse, he dismounted and helped his wounded companion onto his horse. "Blackwell won't forget this," he spat as they prepared to depart. "He doesn't forgive being crossed." "Neither do I," Morgan replied evenly. "Tell your employer that if he or any of his men come near my wife again, what happened today will seem like a pleasant social call in comparison." As the three men retreated back the way they had come, disappearing into the tree line just as Sheriff Taylor and his deputies arrived with Vicent, Prudence let the rifle barrel drop, her hands suddenly shaking too badly to maintain her aim. Morgan was inside the cabin in moments, taking the weapon from her trembling fingers and setting it aside before pulling her into his arms. Prudence went willingly, burying her face against his chest as delayed reaction set in. "You were magnificent," Morgan murmured against her hair. "Brave as a lioness." "I was terrified," Prudence admitted, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I've never pointed a weapon at another human being before." Morgan's arms tightened around her. "Being afraid doesn't make you any less brave. It makes what you did more courageous." Prudence lifted her face to look at him, finding his blue eyes dark with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "I meant what I said, about choosing to stay, about being your wife." For a moment, it seemed Morgan might say something equally momentous, but they were interrupted by Martha bustling into the room, followed by Sheriff Taylor and Vicent. The next hours were consumed with explanations and formality statements taken about the confrontation, assurances from the sheriff that he would send men to escort Blackwell's henchmen to the territorial border, congratulations on their marriage from the deputies who hadn't attended the ceremony. Through it all, Morgan stayed close to Prudence, his hand often finding hers, his eyes frequently seeking her face as if to reassure himself she was truly safe. The casual touches, the protective proximity they felt different now, charged with an awareness that had been simmering between them for weeks, but had crystallized in the moment of danger. By the time the sheriff and his men departed, promising to return in a day or two to confirm that Blackwell's men had left the territory, evening had fallen. Martha, displaying her usual perceptive nature, announced that the excitement had exhausted her, and she was retiring early, leaving Morgan and Prudence alone by the fire once again. For several minutes they sat in companionable silence, processing the events of the day. Then Morgan spoke, his voice soft but intent. "Did you mean it? What you said about choosing to stay?" Prudence met his gaze steadily. "Yes, as my wife, not just in name." The directness of the question made her breath catch, but she didn't hesitate. "Yes." Morgan moved from his chair to kneel before hers, taking her hands in his larger ones. "I need to be clear about this, Prudence. I'm not asking you to stay out of obligation or gratitude. I'm not asking for anything you don't freely want to give. I know that," she assured him. "You've never asked for anything but the chance to keep me safe. And now that you are safe, now that Blackwell's men have been sent away and the sheriff knows our situation." His thumbs traced gentle patterns on the backs of her hands. "What do you want, Prudence? Truly want?" The question was one no man had ever asked her before, not her uncle, certainly not Blackwell or his men. Even her father, for all his progressive views on female education, had assumed certain paths for her future without consultation. But here was Morgan Xavier, a man who had every right according to law and custom to claim her as his wife in all ways, instead kneeling before her and asking what she wanted. "I want to stay," she said softly. "Not because I need protection, but because in these few weeks, this place has become more of a home to me than anywhere since my parents died." Her voice strengthened with certainty. "Because you've become more important to me than I ever expected. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Morgan Xavier." The admission hung in the air between them, momentous and irrevocable. For a heartbeat, Prudence feared she had misread the situation entirely, had mistaken gratitude and attraction for something deeper. Then Morgan's face transformed with a smile of such joy and tenderness that it took her breath away. "I've been falling in love with you since the moment you fell into my arms," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "But I was afraid to say it, afraid you would feel pressured or obligated." "Never," Prudence assured him, reaching out to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with wonder. "You've given me nothing but choices, Morgan, and I choose you, I choose us." Morgan turned his face to press a kiss into her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. "I choose you too, Prudence Xavier. Not for a season or until danger passes, but for as long as you'll have me." When he rose and gently pulled her to her feet, drawing her into his arms, Prudence went willingly. Their first kiss, as a couple truly committed to each other, was everything their brief wedding kiss had not been, tender yet passionate. A promise, and a beginning rather than a perfunctory seal on a practical arrangement. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Morgan rested his forehead against hers. "What about California? Your dreams of teaching?" Prudence smiled, warmed by his continued consideration of her aspirations even in this moment of mutual declaration. "Dreams can change or take new forms," she said, echoing Martha's wisdom. "There are children in this valley who need education too. Vicent mentioned the Mendoza family has 5 children, and there must be others." Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "Many families in these parts struggle to provide proper schooling. A teacher would be welcomed. Then perhaps I can still fulfill my father's legacy, just in a different setting than I imagined." Prudence's fingers traced the line of buttons on Morgan's shirt, "with a different partner by my side." The tenderness in Morgan's expression made her heart swell. "I would be honored to support that dream, Prudence, to watch you build something meaningful here. As you have," she observed. "This land, this home, it's a legacy your parents would be proud of." Morgan glanced around the cabin that had been merely a periodic refuge for him for so many years. "It's become a true home again these past weeks, because of you." The simple sincerity of his words touched Prudence deeply. This man who had caught her when she fell, who had protected her without constraining her, who had given her choices when others sought to remove them. He had also given her a place to belong, a future to build, a love that enhanced rather than diminished her sense of self. "So," she said with a smile that held both certainty and promise, "it seems our marriage of convenience has become rather inconveniently real." Morgan's laugh was warm and rich, filling the cabin with joy. "The most fortunate inconvenience of my life, Mrs. Xavier." As winter melted into spring, Prudence and Morgan's relationship blossomed like the wildflowers that gradually emerged across the valley. The adjustment from their initial arrangement to a true marriage had moments of awkwardness the first time they shared a bedroom, the learning of each other's habits and preferences, the occasional misunderstandings that arise between two strong-willed individuals, but these were far outweighed by the joy they found in building a life together. Martha stayed with them until the snow began to recede from the passes, providing both practical assistance and the occasional nudge when either of them grew stubborn. When she finally returned to Deeming, it was with promises to visit regularly and an invitation for them to stay with her whenever their travels brought them to town. "You've given an old woman hope for the future," she told Prudence as they embraced in farewell. "Watching love grow from such unlikely beginnings has been a privilege." Sheriff Taylor's men reported that Blackwell, faced with legal documentation of Prudence's marriage and the threat of criminal charges if he pursued the matter further, had reluctantly abandoned his claim. The news brought a final resolution to the danger that had initially brought them together, allowing them to look forward rather than constantly watching over their shoulders. True to her word, Prudence began organizing education for the children of neighboring homesteads. By summer, a small school had been established in a renovated outbuilding on the Xavier property, with a dozen students of various ages attending 3 days a week. Morgan expanded the main cabin, adding a proper study where Prudence could prepare lessons, and eventually, they both hoped, a nursery for children of their own. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over their valley, Morgan took Prudence's hand in his, running his thumb over the simple gold band that had once belonged to his mother. "Are you happy?" he asked, echoing the question he had posed months earlier by the fire. Truly happy, Prudence considered the question with the same seriousness she had then, but her answer came without hesitation. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "This life we're building together, it's more fulfilling than any future I had planned for myself." Morgan's smile was tender as he brought her hand to his lips. "When I caught you that day when you jumped from that wagon into my arms, I thought I was saving you." "You were," Prudence reminded him. "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "But you saved me too, Prudence. From loneliness, from wandering without purpose, from the ghost of my sister's memory that kept me from living fully." His blue eyes held hers with earnest intensity. "You brought me home in every sense of the word." Prudence leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder as they watched the last rays of sunlight gild the mountains. "Home isn't a place, it's people," she quoted softly. "Your mother was right." Morgan's arm tightened around her. "She would be proud of the woman I married, of the life we're creating here." As twilight descended on the Xavier homestead, bringing with it the first stars of evening, Prudence reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led her to this moment, from a desperate leap from a moving wagon on a frozen road to the warm certainty of belonging she now felt. Life rarely followed the paths one expected. Sometimes it took a terrifying jump into the unknown, a fall broken by unexpected arms, to find one's true destination. For Prudence Xavier, that destination had turned out to be here in this remote valley, with this remarkable man, building a future neither of them had anticipated but both now cherished beyond measure. And if sometimes she thought of that desperate leap with a sense of wonder and gratitude rather than fear, perhaps it was because she had learned what Morgan had always known, that the most courageous acts often led to the greatest rewards, and that sometimes falling was just another way of finding where you truly belonged.